Knights with guns, that shit's cool. Cody made a video about it a while ago, about why the early modern period is so cool, and by a while ago, I mean like 2, potentially 3 years ago at the time of recording this. So, you know, that's fun. Everything's cold. Everything's going to shit. The Chinese Ming Dynasty got whacked. The Ottomans are stabbing the shit out of each other trying to decide who gets Bosnia. It's wild you'd fight over that. Although now that I think about it, no, there's a lot of people who fought over that. Also, for the record, I like Bosnia. It's my favorite Balkan country. England's civil war is on the horizon, and the climactic finale to all of Europe's religious wars is in full fucking swing, baby. And what is that climactic finale? The 30 Years' War. There's a bunch of reasons to be fascinated by this time period. The juxtaposition of our modern empiricism with heightened superstition and mysticism among the same groups of people, because this is when like witch burnings were happening and shit at the same time that people were like, I wonder how gravity works. There's pike and shot warfare, all the fucking bullshit they tried with cavalry to make that viable again. Whoever came up with the caracol, funniest troll in military history. The democratization of warfare in general, mercenary armies are pretty interesting, as much as they are pretty gross. The parallels to our modern demographic and political crises, and the sheer fucking balls you had to have to go fight in one of those wars. So, being as chaotic and interesting as it is, I thought I would use the early modern period as a basis to write a novel, specifically the 30 Years' War. And I did write that novel. It's called Angels of Fortune, which is a working title, and I will, at some point, hopefully, release it. Maybe. It costs a lot of money to self-publish a book. But when I first started out writing this project, I basically the concept is I wanted to... You know how Game of Thrones just takes the War of the Roses and then renames everybody? But, you know, the War of the Roses still plays out. That's what I wanted to do with the 30 Years' War. Is take early modern Germany, rename everybody, shuffle some shit around, Mount and Blade it, and then just have the 30 Years' War play out, more or less, with some slight but significant changes. The problem is that I had no fucking idea where to start, because all the explanations about the 30 Years' War that I could find on YouTube were incredibly dry, and that is usually where I start my research for any given historical topic. Is I'll see a cool YouTube video about it and I'll go, ooh, this is interesting, and then I'll end up reading like 12 hours worth of Wikipedia pages, which leads to like thrice that of books and papers, and yeah. Maybe it's a self-control issue. At least in terms of the grander narrative, it seemed like even the people who were interested in this time period didn't really know how to present it in a way that was like interesting to the viewer, and it just felt like it couldn't be as captivating as like the Punic Wars or the Crusades or literally any other war on this like grand scale. People just see the 30 Years' War, if they even know what that is to start with, which when you're talking about the early modern period, if it doesn't have to do with pilgrims, it's impressive if someone knows what it is, at least in America. I would hope that most English people know about the English Civil War of that time period. I shouldn't set those standards. The bar for America is in hell. Europe can't be that far off. People mostly see the 30 Years' War as this like nihilistic religious war of backstabbing and treachery, which it absolutely was, but they talk about that element of it in such like a dismissive, like doomer way about it that it doesn't tickle my autism in the right way, right? Like, it really underplays how interesting it actually is. Most discourse I've seen likes to focus on the more, like, consequentialist angle on the war. Stuff like, oh, it killed half of Germany and stuff, and people talk about how epic the conflict was and how exhausted and traumatized everyone was after the fact that they didn't want to fight about religion ever again. But in the recountings of the war, I don't see it. I don't see this like big epic like borderline war to end all wars, but with muskets that like it's just not there. It's just not there in the material that there is about it. So look, I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. So I'm going to do what I do best, and I'm going to try and take this one war that really, really doesn't want to have its story told, apparently, and try to tell its story, and I will drag it kicking and screaming until I find a way to distill it in an interesting way and try to put 30 years of warfare all into one video, which I'm now realizing is going to take... That's not going to be fun. But I will make sure that hopefully most people leaving this video will understand that the 30 Years' War is the conflict that it's cracked up to be, and it's a fucking hootenanny of a war. That's a word I haven't used before. So if you like this video and want to see any of my equally folly-driven projects, please do me a favor, hit the algorithm buttons accordingly. Also, I'm not going to be like super fucking specific about a lot of details, especially regarding like logistics and individual movements. So I'm not gonna talk about like I'll say like, ooh, X person was here and actually X person was in a town like 10 miles away or something. Like I'm not gonna. So if I get that wrong and you feel the need to correct me, please do so politely in the comments. So yeah, this is gonna be a long video. And the longest part of it is going to be why it started. So, the 30 Years' War is generally split up into about 5 phases. These are not 6 years per phase. The phases are wildly unequal, but we'll get to that. The 5 phases are the Bohemian revolt, the Palatinate campaign, the Danish intervention, the Swedish intervention, and the French intervention. There are a lot of interventions here. One thing that a lot of coverage of this war does is hyper-focus on the Swedish intervention phase, since that's where you get a lot of your big characters crashing together, like Gustavus Adolphus and Johann von Tilly and Albrecht von... okay, I have it written here as his Czech, the Czech way of saying it, which I think is Waldsteiner. Wallenstein... or Wallenstein would be the correct pronunciation, but Wallenstein, I'm going to say Wallenstein because saying German words with an American accent sounds wrong to me. This is what I get for studying German. Now I just sound like a Wehraboo every time I want to pronounce something correctly. So these phases are all escalations of one another, and when I was first researching this period for Angels of Fortune, it was real difficult getting a straight answer as to why this whole thing was happening in the first place. There was always like 1,000 disclaimers about how, oh, it's not just one thing, but it's a whole list of things. So then I'm like, okay, bet, can you give me a list? And I'll be like, oh, but the list is too many things on the list. We can't just give you a simple list. There's like 100 little reasons. And I'm like, can you if the Bronze Age collapse can come up with a concise list as to why all the shit that went down there happened, why can't you do the same for the 30 Years' War? Why do I have to read a fucking 50-page document about it? I mean, yeah, this is the longest part of the video, so it is complex, I'll give you that, but it's not that complex that you can't just give me a list. Watch. I'll fucking do it right now. I'll do it right now. Because they always say, oh, it was religion, but actually it wasn't religion. It was dynastic politics. And it's like, no shit. That's what all wars are about, is power politics. So I'm going to tell you why this one in particular was so fucked up and all the shit that led up to it. So yeah, I'll do it. Part of this video is just me airing my grievances about how shitty of an experience I had researching this war, which has never been an issue for me before. Part of the reason I like this period so much, I'm convinced, is just sunk cost fallacy at this point. It took way more effort and was way more annoying just to get the fucking basics of this period down pat than it should have been. So this is my gift to anyone who is like me and wants to know the big picture of what happened here. This is that. And this, I guess, is how I would have preferred to see it. Here's the essential thing you need to know. In 1250, the last Hohenstaufen emperor, Frederick II, dies. And the battle that had been going on between the church and the secular state since, like, 1071, maybe, comes to an end, with the church coming out on top. The next 250 to 300 years is just a giant cesspool of the church becoming complacent in victory. The Catholic Church was being discredited and corrupted just fucking left and right. The Western Schism made it so there were two popes, one of whom was very evidently owned by the King of France, but the one owned by the King of France had the more legitimate lineage claim to the actual, like, line of popes, whereas the one that they were like, fuck it, we're gonna make our own pope who's actually in Rome and is Roman. That one just kind of came out of nowhere, so even though he has the it's a whole thing. And it wasn't a great look. The Black Death that happened right around the same time was seen as evidence that the church wasn't spiritually virtuous enough to actually do their job and protect Christendom. The Crusades kept failing and getting worse with every attempt. In fact, the last successful crusade was done by a guy who was proclaimed the Antichrist by the Pope. I'll make a whole video about him. He's a pretty cool guy. Eventually, the Hussite Wars become a testament to people's desire for something that isn't the current Catholic Church, because they evidently suck ass. And all this shit is just a steaming cauldron of bullshit piling up over 300 years until the 1500s, when Martin Luther just fucking snaps and has had enough, and the whole Protestant Reformation thing kicks off.
Go ahead. Take it from me.
The Protestants and the Catholics were officially religious groups, which is why people say that the 30 Years' War was about religion. But the Protestants and the Catholics are also sort of political groups. So it's not just your faith. Being Protestant or being Catholic is a lifestyle. It's an ideology. It's a political position. If you're Protestant, you're high autonomy. If you're Catholic, you're status quo. Stuff like that. And the general, the vibe was similar to, so you know how the left and the right in modern America hate each other? That is the exact way that the Protestants and the Catholics hated each other, and pretty much for the similar reasons. So yeah, it was basically just a political feud, or our modern politics are a religious feud. After the initial wave of Reformation, the religious wars started. The most important of these before the 30 Years' War was the Schmalkaldic War, where Karl V, the last emperor to ever be crowned by the Pope, and my second favorite Habsburg, crushed the Schmalkaldic League, which was an alliance of Lutheran princes and electors throughout the Holy Roman Empire. Karl V was he was called ruler of the world by a lot of people. So he thought, oh, I can just integrate the Protestants back into the Catholic fold, easy peasy. That sparked another war after the Schmalkaldic War, and he realized, oh, that's not going to be as easy as I thought it would. So Karl V agreed to this thing called the Peace of Augsburg, which was the document that set up how religion was going to work throughout the empire. Ideally, it was going to last forever, but the agreement had a couple issues. The basic tenet was this: if you are a German prince who owns land, whatever religion you profess to be a part of is the religion of your princedom. This was supposed to be the compromise that, fixed everything. But you can probably see some of the cracks appearing already. As a peasant, if your prince was particularly indecisive, you could be forced to switch religion 3 times in a month. Augsburg basically sanctioned the persecution of both Protestants and Catholics in different regions of the empire. Not that it hadn't already been happening, but a document basically enshrining it in law was kind of not great. This agreement started a whole bunch of wars, foremost of which is the Cologne War, where the Burgermeister decided to just convert to Calvinism for shits and giggles, I guess, forcing the super important Catholic electorate of Cologne to become Calvinist. Augsburg wasn't working, but it was the closest thing they had to something that would work. It did guarantee the rights of Protestants to worship in Protestant princedoms. So when the Holy Roman Emperor Matthias died without any children, Archduke Ferdinand II took over. Little issue about Ferdinand. Ever since he took over Austria, the Protestants had been kind of worried about him. He was a militant Catholic who crushed Protestantism out of Styria, which is a part of Austria, and it looked as though he would try to do the same with the rest of the empire when he ascended to the throne. When he came to power, a lot of Protestant princes came to him asking to reconfirm the rights of Augsburg. He agreed under the condition that all the formerly Catholic churches were restored to being Catholic. This directly violated the case-by-case basis that Augsburg said was supposed to happen whenever a Catholic bishop wanted the land that had been turned Protestant back, or even though nobody in the region might have been Catholic. That led to an escalation of tensions, you might say, which is a tad bit of an understatement. I'm so fucking mad. You're shitting me. You've got to be... Oh my god. Okay, this is my 3rd time recording this, because the first time my phone ran out of storage, and the second time I fucking forgot to hit record, and I want to fucking kill myself. Another huge element is the Jülich succession, which is this war that was being fought over the inheritance of this huge duchy called Jülich-Kleverberg, because no one could figure out which one the main title was supposed to be. But it owned a shit ton of land on the Rhine, and this was kind of a problem as to who inherited it, because it was also where a lot of the Spanish road that Spain would use to get all their troops from the Mediterranean to the Netherlands so they could kick some Protestant ass in the Dutch revolt. That's the road they would take. And it would be a problem if a Protestant got a hold of that land, because then they would block it. Yeah, that's it. I'm not going insane from having to read this all over again. Also, the Jülich succession sparked the creation of the Arcanite. Not Arcanite. They're Protestants. They're not Arcanite. Can you tell in my head that the names I gave for stuff in Angels of Fortune and the actual history are fucking interchangeable to me at this point? It created the Protestant Union and the Catholic League. The Protestant Union was run by the Count Palatinate, and the Catholic League was ruled by the Duke of Bavaria. Side note, the Count Palatinate and the Duke of Bavaria are both titles that are historically held by the Wittelsbachs, so this whole conflict is just two Wittelsbachs fighting each other. House of Wittelsbach is like the second most powerful house in Germany after the Habsburgs. They're pretty cool. They had a lot of monarchs outside of Germany. They got one emperor. He was pretty cool, Ludwig IV. I will probably make a video on him at some point. Lastly, I'm going to make sure it's recording this time. I'm going to make sure it's recording. Okay, yes, it's recording. Last thing, Bohemia. The Kingdom of Bohemia in modern-day Czechia, it was one of the largest, most powerful, and richest sub-nations of the Holy Roman Empire. It had been the center of power for the Luxembourg dynasty before they got exterminated, and it had also been the center of the Hussite revolt. So for the last like 200 years or so, Bohemia in general had been vaguely anti-Catholic. After the fall of the Luxembourgs, the Habsburgs took over Bohemia, and the nobility of Bohemia were generally Protestant, meaning there was some conflict going on between the very Catholic Habsburgs and the very Protestant Bohemian nobles. To impart the importance of this upon you, I'm going to yap a little bit about the Holy Roman Empire's electoral system. So by this point, the empire's running on the Golden Bull of 1356, which is this, it's a constitution, essentially. And the constitution was designed to say, okay, no more of this, oh, we don't know who the electors are, so we're just going to pick like a random number of randomly powerful electors and have them vote. So the electors were defined. And there's seven of them. Tell I'm losing my mind. There's 7 electors. And I'm going to run through how each of them vote most of the time. 3 ecclesiastical electors, 4 secular electors. The 3 ecclesiastical electors are all archbishops, so very Catholic. That's Mainz, Trier, Cologne, all a shoe-in for Mr. Ferdinand. They vote Habsburg pretty much every time. So yeah, they vote for whoever is the most Catholic because they are archbishops. Duh. Secular lords. We got the Count Palatinate, leader of the Protestant Union. So it's pretty clear who he's voting for. Margraf of Brandenburg, also quite Protestant. Duke of Saxony, also Protestant. Although the Duke of Saxony flipped sides quite a few times over the course of the 30 Years' War. He was kind of a dick. John George. Fuck that guy. Last elector. Guess who it is? It's Bohemia. Bohemia with Catholic monarch and Protestant nobles and people. Bohemia, that if it had a monarch that better reflected its nobles and people, would vote Protestant, and then the empire would have a Protestant emperor, and everything would be Protestant, and it would all be great. But because they have a Catholic monarch, everything's Catholic, because that one vote decides the fate of the empire, because the other 6 always vote with whoever they always vote for. So if you have Bohemia, you have the empire. So when Ferdinand ascends to the throne and he's very, very unpopular with the Bohemian nobles, and the Bohemian nobles maybe say, maybe we should oust this guy. It is a very, very, very tempting offer for whoever is on the receiving end of that. Hey, would you like the final vote that decides who is emperor? So yeah. As a kind of a big deal. So, to recap, the failure of Augsburg, the Jülich succession, Ferdinand's radicalism, and the balance of power among the electors centered on Bohemia are the core reasons for why the 30 Years' War started and all of its subsequent escalations. That's 4 items. That's not a very long list, and I just did it here. It was not very hard. It just took a lot of reading and a lot of recording. And now I'm starting to wonder if maybe God doesn't want me to make this video.
Es klingt so fein, in majorem Dei Gloria, die Pfeife und die Trommel.
So the Bohemian Revolt is one of those more known bits of the 30 Years' War, specifically for the defenestration of Prague. More accurately, the third defenestration of Prague, because I guess they really liked throwing people out of windows. The Bohemians were understandably a little suspicious when Ferdinand confirmed their rights to worship, given his record with Styria, but after a bunch of property cases involving some old church land were all decided in favor of the Catholic Church, the nobles were pretty fucking sure that Ferdinand was intent on stamping out the religion. This is backstab number 1. I'm not keeping a backstab counter because there are too many to count, and most of them I probably won't even go over. But we're gonna keep track of the big ones, especially at the start. So the Bohemians decided, fuck it, and threw 3 of Ferdinand's emissaries out of a window. They went behind Ferdinand's back and created a Protestant government and offered the crown to who else but Frederick V, Count Palatinate. This is backstab number 2. This would have made Bohemia a Protestant vote and would have ruined the Habsburgs pretty much right there and all their ambitions for Germany. And we talked about this before in the last section, and that reminds me, I'm gonna check if I'm recording. I am recording. See, now I'm super paranoid about it. So Bohemia and Silesia both revolt, and the problem is that both of them were kind of big cash cows for the Habsburg operations in Central Europe. So losing them meant not only would they lose the vote for emperor, but they would also be broke as shit and forced to rely on the Spanish branch of the family and the Catholic League to a lesser extent. The involvement of Spain financially drew the Dutch in financially at this point. They're not quite in on the, and France considered, although the whole story arc of France for this war is just deciding whether they hated the Habsburgs or the Protestants more. And the answer is both. People who just hated the Habsburgs and didn't really have a horse in the religion race, like the Duke of Savoy and the Ottomans, also contributed. The Ottomans sent the Calvinist Prince of Wallachia to invade Hungary for a day before they got pretty much immediately involved in a war with Persia and were diplomacied out of the war. The Duke of Savoy helped Frederick raise a mercenary army under Ernst von Mansfeld in preparation for a potential war, and while I generally think of the Protestants as the closest thing to the good guys in this war, since I'm not a huge Habsburg fan and also not a big low autonomy, yes, let's do whatever the church says, that ain't really my speed. I need to just call out how much of a fucking buffoon Ernst von Mansfeld is. The one fucking thing the German Protestants could never figure out is how to get a good general. They had one who was the king of Sweden. So, not the German Protestants, they didn't have jack shit. Ernst von Mansfeld could not win a battle to save his life, and he was up against Johann Serglas von Tilly and Albrecht Wallenstein, who are 2 of the most successful commanders in Holy Roman Empire history. So, it's kind of a slaughter. Anyway, Frederick's advisors, including the Duke of Savoy and his father-in-law, the King of England, pleaded with him not to accept the crown of Bohemia, since it was offered to him 2 days before Ferdinand was elected emperor. However, the Dutch and the ruler of Anhalt seemingly didn't give a shit and said, yeah, go for it. Frederick decided to accept making the war inevitable. His support basically eroded overnight, causing Saxony to flip sides in order to try and get some land out of it because, again, John George is an asshole. While the Protestant Union, who was led by Frederick, all of them backed off and said, hey, we're not part of this, all right? Fuck off. Frederick still got crowned King of Bohemia and would later be dubbed the Winter King. Which is a badass moniker until you ask why he was called that, and it's because he was king for 1 winter. The Catholics, led by Bavaria, sent an army there under Count Johann Serclaes von Tilly. Tilly was a Belgian commander who cut his teeth in the Dutch revolt, and by cut his teeth, I mean he was there until he was 60, and now that he is 61, he's going to fight the 30 Years' War. So even though this guy should have retired, he was a hell of a general, and up until that point, had never lost a single battle. And the only time he would ever lose a battle is against Gustavus Adolphus, like 10 years from now. With that track record, the Catholics beat Frederick's ass at the Battle of White Mountain, marking the end of the revolt. The revolt lasted 2.5 years out of the 30 that this war is supposed to take. So we're in for a fucking ride.
Setz aufs Kloster nach den roten Hahn. Spieß voran, hey, lauf und dran. Setz aufs Kloster nach den roten Hahn.
So the Palatinate campaign can be seen kind of as this like cleanup phase for the Bohemian revolt, where most of it is just Ferdinand desperately trying not to get clapped. Ferdinand, after White Mountain, executed as many of the rebelling nobles as he could get away with, and many of the German princes wanted to keep things from spilling out of Bohemia and keep it just to that, so the war doesn't blow up Germany, which I think was a pretty reasonable demand. But Duke Maximilian of Bavaria was a little greedy during the peace talks and told the emperor, hey, you owe me money. Give me the Palatinate.
I want that thing. And the Allies would say, you can't have that thing. Okay, you can have that thing, but no more. I want that thing. And repeat.
Which would have made Bavaria an electoral state, turning one of the Protestant electors into a Catholic one. This was fucking stupid. Most of the Protestants withdrew their support from Frederick when he first tried to take the crown of Bohemia on the grounds that he was deposing a rightfully elected king. So what do you think happened when they wanted to depose a rightful Count Palatinate? This is where the Spanish road issue really comes into play. The Spanish hadn't really contributed that much to the revolt, aside from like monetary stuff. Because recall at this time, they're extracting like mountains of gold from Latin America. But when the Catholics started marching on the Palatinate and the Protestants rose up against them, the Spanish were like, all right, we'll get involved, and just like poured in from fighting the Jülich succession. They were nearby. The King of England, James I, was Frederick's father-in-law, while Moritz of Orange, the leader of the Dutch, was Frederick's uncle. Both committed to the Protestant cause, sending mercenaries, naval threats, and raised armies upon Spanish involvement, because obviously. Frederick's allies included the Margraf of Baden and Christian of Brunswick, and he had plenty of soldiers at his disposal. Frederick's demand was the full restoration of his lands in the Palatinate, fairly reasonable, but since that went against the peace treaty for the Bohemian Revolt, there wasn't a lot of chance for peace talks. I wanna talk about something real quick. I'm gonna put the script aside. So you heard me talk about all the shit the Protestants had going for them, right? And, huge armies from England, the Netherlands, the Badenese are on their side, Brunswick, Brandenburg. I think Saxony switched sides again. A lot of dudes. Huge, beefy army for the Protestants. And they fucking fumbled it in like less than a year. All these guys. But they couldn't find one good fucking commander to organize them. They couldn't find not a single one. They just sent them all to Ernst von Mansfeld. And Ernst von Mansfeld sent them all to the fucking meat grinder because he can't tell the difference between a fucking slaughterhouse and a battlefield. Like, I really think the Protestants shouldn't have done as bad as they did in this phase of the war. Because it's surprisingly bad. So bad, in fact, that the part of the 30 Years' War that I changed for Angels of Fortune, my novel, is I made it so I gave the Protestants a competent commander. And that's my main character. That's my only change to the history of it. And they still lose, but it's like they put in a good effort for all the shit they had going for them. I'm just like how did you how? I know that Tilly and Wallenstein's not even in the picture for this one. I know that Tilly's really good at his job. But come the fuck on, man. This is where the astounding failures of Ernst von Mansfeld just really shine. He got his ass kicked so many times that he had to start plundering the Palatinate, the land he was supposed to be protecting, in order to fund himself, because that's how much money he was losing. The Protestants couldn't really coordinate in time, so they lost, and Maximilian got his electoral power. Though, fun fact, one of the decisive battles in the Palatinate campaign at Wimpfen featured the use of the Wagenburg. And the Wagenburg is this cool little tactic the Hussites used, where they would just hook all their wagons up together with chains, and then they would take the artillery pieces that they used those wagons to transport, and they'd set them all up in the middle and just fucking bombard everyone around the outside. I don't know. I thought it was a fun little thing, so I put it in the book. Anyway, Mansfeld and Frederick both end up retreating to the Dutch Republic, where they stayed for pretty much until the end of their lives, or until the end of the war. The Palatinate campaign was real fucking short, taking like 1 year at best to complete. So not all these phases are created equal. I think this is also a good time to go into some of the details about what life was like, since I'm saying these things about movements and tactics and whatnot, but every battle was fraught with some unspeakable acts after the fact, and every march involved robbing innocent people of their goods, taking their women and children for what essentially boils down to slavery, as camp followers, and it's real ugly. 1632 is an alt history book that I think gives a good, if a little biased, account of the on-the-ground view of the war. It's kind of a funny concept of they just transport a West Virginia town from like late 90s, early 2000s into Thuringia in Germany, and it's just like, see how that goes. Obviously, very biased towards the Protestants, very biased towards the Americans, a lot of boomerisms, but it's a fine read. It is a good representation of how shitty mercenaries are during the war. If you were a woman, you could end up being forced to follow these mercenaries and carry their plunder for miles across the continent. There's this one woman in the book that is forced to carry a fucking iron bed frame like halfway across Germany because the guy she belongs to couldn't find anything valuable in a farmer's household except that. And if you didn't do that, you were... word I can't say that rhymes with great, and it happens a lot. In addition to that, and you didn't get off if you were a guy either. If you were a boy, you got kicked the shit out of and were basically forced to do slave labor. And the only way for you to get out of that was to also become a mercenary and do all these terrible things to other people. I'm not like a bleeding heart typically, but Jesus. This is something that was kind of lost on me while I was writing Angels of Fortune, so the book ended up being kind of squeaky clean, in spite of being one of my darker novels. So I'm going to have to go back and write in that sort of thing. If I want high fidelity to the historical period, which maybe I won't do. I don't know. I'm not super comfortable writing about that sort of thing. Maybe that's just more about me. I don't know. Anyway, the Palatinate campaign is over by 1622, and there's about 3 years where jack shit happens. Since the next phase doesn't start until 1625.
Der Todreiter feinen kohlschwarzen Rappen, hat ein undurchsichtige Kappen. Wenn Landsknecht in das Feld marschieren, lässt sein Ross daneben galoppieren.
I was wrong before when I was ranting about how much the Protestants had. Turns out Brandenburg and Saxony were actually neutral and not on the Protestant side during the Palatinate campaign. But I still think my frustration is valid. Nonetheless, After Frederick got deposed from the Palatinate, it made Brandenburg and Saxony, understandably, pretty worried that the Catholics would try to reclaim bishoprics held by Protestants in their lands as well. When Tilly restored the bishopric of Halberstadt, that kind of confirmed those fears. And this is where shit starts getting really, really complicated. I can't really find out why Ferdinand didn't try to just end the war after the Palatinate campaign. Maybe it was because of all the Protestant coalition building that happened in the wake of it, or maybe he was just fucking high off his own success. I don't really have the answer. It could be pretty much anything. Depends on your characterization of Ferdinand. The Danish king, Christian, was German, just like pretty much every other monarch in Europe, and had holdings in northern Germany, leading him to be elected as the military leader for the Protestant cause after Frederick was ousted. Christian was kind of a LARPer when it came to his intervention, since he did have genuine economic fears about the subjugation of northern Germany, but he really played up this like fake savior of the Germans role, and it never really feels genuine to me when I read about it. Also, the French started aiding the Protestants financially along with England. Ferdinand bribes Albrecht von Wallenstein to lead the imperial army. Wallenstein was the new guy on the block for the Catholics. He's also a really good commander, but was more often than not at odds with the interest of his patrons than Tilly was. He contributed pretty heavily to the victory at White Mountain and was the one to defeat Gustavus Adolphus later on. Ferdinand sent Wallenstein to take over northern Germany and start building a fleet to take over Denmark's Baltic trade hegemony, because pretty much all of Denmark's economy is concentrated in this little strait of the Øresund, or Øresund. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but basically it's the one pass between the Baltic Sea and the North Sea, and that's why Copenhagen is where it is. So the said bribe that Wallenstein received involved giving him lands confiscated from the rebelling Bohemian nobles, and allowed Wallenstein to just kind of take whatever he wanted up north. This may have been a result of both Ferdinand's lack of funds and an adrenaline high, thinking the German princes wouldn't unite against him for this. The Spanish were a lot more reluctant to antagonize the Protestants, we'll just put it that way. And an even more fucking genius move, Ferdinand made an imperial edict that demanded all lands taken from the Catholic Church after 1555 be returned. Which obviously was not a popular decision by him. The Danish intervention phase ended when Wallenstein insisted that Ferdinand make peace, fearing a Swedish intervention in spite of all of his victories. The Danish phase lasted a whole 4 years, but didn't really have a lot going on there, aside from Wallenstein just kicking ass. Though it is still the longest phase we've seen yet, ending in 1629. Which leads us into the phase where shit actually starts happening, which is the Swedish. Is one of the major warrior kings of Sweden. He has a kick-ass Sabaton song, and rarely lost a battle, if ever. He took Christian's whole savior of the Germans role and just cranked it up to 11 when he invaded the Baltic coast of Germany. The Swedish military was feared all over the world for its power, as it had cut its teeth against the Poles and the Russians, and were renowned for their string of victories for the Swedish Empire. However, the widespread support of Gustavus expected from the German princes turned out to be kind of lacking, since Brandenburg and Saxony both had ambitions in Pomerania that Sweden was hampering. And again, John George of Saxony is a dickhead, because this is not the fucking time to be worried about this. Sweden only got the support it needed after the sack of Magdeburg. Magdeburg was by far one of the most horrific occurrences of violence throughout the whole war. Tilly had been besieging the city for a while, eager to restore the Diocese of Magdeburg, but after 2 months, Magdeburg tried to make peace and surrender. The issue is that word about this didn't reach Tilly before he broke through the walls. In the sack of Magdeburg, many of the mercenary troops under Tilly's command hadn't been paid in a while and just went out of control, torturing and raping their way across the city, and now I'm questioning why I censored myself that first time. And they burnt most of the city to the ground. Of the 1,900 buildings that were there, 1,700 went up in flames, and of 25,000 inhabitants, by the end of the sack, only 5,000 remained. The massacre made a deep impression on the Protestants and showed them what the consequences of an imperial victory could look like. Gustavus and his new allies used mostly French money to fund their army, winning decisively against Tilly at Breitenfeld and then again at Rhine, where Tilly was killed at a ripe old age of 73. Still on the battlefield, too. But by that point, Gustavus had overextended himself in his invasion, and Ferdinand once again turned to Wallenstein. The Battle of Lutzen, where Wallenstein and Gustavus met, ended in Gustavus's death, and both sides suffered immense casualties. After his death, the Swedes, French, and German Protestants formed the Heilbronn League and managed to defeat Wallenstein. This defeat led to rumors being circulated about the division between the Bavarian Catholic League and the Imperial Army, since technically, while they were on the same side, they were not aligned to the same lords. Some believed Wallenstein wanted to switch sides. After all, he had been born a Protestant in spite of converting. Ferdinand ordered Wallenstein's arrest, but before that could happen, the general's own officers assassinated him in 1634. With all three major players on both sides dead by the end of the Swedish intervention, the war in Germany shifted west as the war became sort of more of a proxy conflict between the French and the Spanish. The Swedish intervention phase lasted 5 years, from 1630 to 1635. Also the longest we've seen yet. But we still have over 10 years on this war. We still have 13 to go. The fifth and final phase of the war is the French intervention starting in 1635. Up until this point, the war had been a series of escalating phases, up until the Swedish intervention being a sort of climax. By 1635, any vigor the countries involved in the war had in the past was just completely gone. The war had been going on for almost 20 years, and Germany was obviously in ruins by this point. France declared war on Spain in 1635, and in response, the German princes agreed to a peace with Ferdinand that rescinded the Edict of Restitution. That was the whole thing of like, you have to return all the church lands to us, type thing, in exchange for the dissolution of the Heilbronn League, also in exchange for the dissolution of the Catholic League. It was now Spain and the Imperial Army against France and Sweden. Ferdinand II died in 1637, replaced by his son, Ferdinand III, who I will be referring to whenever I say Ferdinand from now on, who came to power in the face of a crippling military position. The last phase of the war is a slow, just like grinding of Germany like grains under a millstone. Overly complicated, petty, yet still just as deadly. The war in this period moves like a glacier, destroying everything in its path to gain precious little in land and victories. This is the point where the fighting really starts to feel like meaningless. The people that continue to fight do so for the sake of dynastic power and income from plunder. Eventually, no side can really afford to take it anymore, as the French king died in 1643. In 1644, the Bavarian and French fought at Freiburg, both suffering heavy casualties. The end of this battle convinced Maximilian that the war could no longer be won, and Maximilian put pressure on the new emperor to make peace. The war came to a stop in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia. which ended the war, but heavily diminished the Holy Roman Empire, allowing non-German states to secede from the empire in exchange for ceding all Protestant-occupied bishoprics to Protestant churches. A general attitude towards freedom of conscience was adopted by the generation that made peace, having been raised in the midst of this war pretty much all their lives. Germany was devastated, and Magdeburg wouldn't return to its previous population until the fucking 19th century, apparently. Europe in general had been traumatized by this war and agreed to resolve all disputes through a Congress-style system designed to end wars quickly. Not necessarily stop wars, there's still plenty of that, as we can see from the 1700s. And that was a 4,000-word summary of the 30 Years' War. Not too bad, if I do say so myself. Just over 1,300 words per decade. Hopefully this has given you a much better idea of how the 30 Years' War played out in the big scheme of things. At least I hope it's less vague in your head as an entity. I'm also hoping that if you want to look into the war, you now know where to start and can navigate it using these phases, since they were all pretty different from one another. Oh, I can't wait to see how long that video is going to be. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Again, if you enjoyed this and want to see my other work or enjoy my other work, please do hit the subscribe button. It makes me very happy to see the number go up. I will not lie to you about that. As for what I have in the works, I've written 2 videos about sort of writing and world building, and I kind of want to gauge. I know that's not like the niche that I've found. Well, it is kind of the niche I found to be successful. We'll see how they do. I'm gonna release at least one of them. Probably there. I've one about writing and world building, like fantasy history, and how to do that in a easier way. And then I have one that's about how to write realistic feeling cultures. But yeah, bye.